right, now to kickstart the evening, we have a riveting panel discussion lined up for you titled Entrepreneurship Time is Now, which will be moderated by Sunanda right here. And I'd now like to invite up her panel. Joining her is the Managing Director of the State Bank of India, Mr. Rajneesh Kumar. Sir, can we have you on stage, please? The Director, Personal Systems, HP India, Mr. Ketan Patel. Group Head, Business Development and the CEO of the NSE Academy, Mr. Ravi Varanasi. And finally, the Chairman and CEO of Renew Power, Mr. Sumant Sinha.
I know there are a lot of things that are happening currently in terms of the economy, but let me start on a somewhat safe topic and start with maybe opening comments to ask each of you, what is entrepreneurship to you? And maybe let me start with the entrepreneur on the panel, Sumant.
Sure. No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me to speak at this forum. It's always a pleasure to talk about entrepreneurship, which for me is a passion. So your question is, what is entrepreneurship? And to me, entrepreneurship, more than anything else, is a state of mind. I think there are a couple of elements that go along with that state of mind. And those really are that you need to, first of all, have some degree of self-belief in yourself. That you can start something on your own and do some really good things with whatever is the opportunity that is there in front of you. The second thing is that you need to have risk-taking ability. Because obviously, if you're starting as an entrepreneur, there is a very good chance that you may not succeed in what you're going to do. You obviously hope that you will, but there's an equally good chance that you actually might end up failing. And so therefore, you have to have that risk-taking ability. Now, to the extent that you can protect your downsides, obviously so much the better, but that's not always possible. So you have to be prepared for the fact that if you start something, it may or may not work out. So that I think is the second thing that you have to be focused on. And the third thing, which is also very important, is that whatever area you get into, whatever thing that you start, it is very important that you understand that area extremely well. Because in any industry or any sector, there are certain truths in that sector. There are certain realities, there are certain axioms. And those are things that either you understand or you don't understand. And if you don't understand them, you can spend a lot of your time making very fundamental mistakes that you could have avoided if you'd actually understood the industry from a very deep level.
Entrepreneurship is opposite of a banker. Let me put it this way. So by nature, bankers are very conservative, and Mr. Sinha spoke about the risk-taking capability. So I think entrepreneurship is about conceiving an idea, and then how do you go about implementing that idea. In the process, take the risk, and of course, if you take the risk, definitely there has to be a reward. So risk-reward matrix works.
If you really see entrepreneurship of past versus today's age entrepreneurship, is about really working with youth, working with new age group of people, working with new age technologies which are very different, and being able to globally compete in a global world. Because no, it's not a day where you are actually competing in a small area or a location or a state which you are in. So it should be globally competitive. So I think if you sum it up, other speakers have already spoken about ability to take risk, etc. will remain, but that's what the fundamental stuff would be.
So would MSMEs and entrepreneurship then, just to pick up on what Sumant was saying, is it particularly important then in a country like India? And are we seeing enough of that happening right now?
In fact, entrepreneurship is possibly built into Indian psyche. I mean, it's not as if something new has happened. We have always had small businesses flourishing, but most of the small businesses have remained small businesses, and most of the professionals, so-called professionals, people who are into higher education, are not looking at entrepreneurship. And generally, there is, failure is not easily accepted in Indian culture. So there is a fear of failure, and say in US, people in other countries, basically, they think if somebody starts an enterprise and fails, it's seen as an accomplishment, and it's seen as an experience. In India, it is actually seen as something people have lost. I mean, somebody has lost out. So the cultural issues are there. To that extent, I think right skilling, right environment for entrepreneurs to grow. A lot of effort is happening, obviously, particularly in the engineering colleges and the management institutions. A lot of buzz around entrepreneurship. But I think it is confined to high-tech and e-commerce kind of an areas. The actual manufacturing, the service sector, possibly seeing very little activity. I mean, a lot of effort is going from the government and various institutions, and I'm sure things are slowly changing. It's a question of if you have to take 300 million people, employment is not the only option.
MSMEs is the answer, clearly. But if you really look at the data in India, only 3% of MSMEs actually get converted to large enterprises. And that's a big area and challenge for Indian mid-sized companies, that while that can be the answer, but if they don't transform themselves into large enterprises, then more and more passion and dream of MSMEs is to really get into that level. And it is a transformation journey across workforce, how you transform workforce, how you transform internal processes, how you're making a small idea go into very bigger scale, then it'll really make an impact. It has definitely an impact. The data shows 8% GDP contribution. To me, it seems like they can contribute to almost 30-40% of GDP if they really start scaling. And that is one area of opportunity which clearly is available in India right now.
Sure. In fact, 36 million MSMEs is what we have right now in India. And Mr. Kumar, I just want to quickly bring you in at this point. While we are talking about, the demographic dividend, for example, like Sumant was saying, we are talking about just how many MSMEs and the innovation that we're seeing in India right now. The quality of the workforce, of course, is something that we still continue talking about. I remember NASSCOM came up with a survey a few years ago. They're saying only 20% of all people who are passing out of institutes are actually employable. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of innovation. At the same time, we're seeing enough young billionaires, millionaires who are coming out of India. Is there a dichotomy there in your mind?
But I think that dichotomy is rising out of that the size of the population itself is very big. And the number of institutions which impart quality education, that still is very, very limited. And even if you look at, even at IITs, IIMs or ISB, whenever they have tried to venture outside their main campus, that quality has been in a manner compromised. So quality of education of the young people who are going to the colleges or even premier institutions. So from employers' perspective, I also keep on hearing very often that employability of these people is very much a difficulty. So the quality of education, and particularly higher education, it needs to be improved. The entire ecosystem in the country, it has to be geared to promote entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs like Sumant, I know for now quite some time, and I presume is doing very well in the renewable power space. So the opportunities are many, and as I said, that our population base is large. There's a huge consumption requirement. There's a huge infrastructure requirement. Manufacturing, of course, we missed the bus, but again, with emphasis on Make in India. So the share of GDP, share of manufacturing in GDP, which is currently at just 15%. For a country like India, that share of manufacturing in GDP needs to go up.
Can I make a quick point? See, I think one of the problems in India is that the entire startup sector in India is defined as being the e-commerce space. And we've, unfortunately, in our media, in our discourse, we've developed a bit of a fixation on that one sector. And therefore, we're not really encouraging young people to think about starting off in other areas, whether it's manufacturing or the service sector, as we mentioned earlier. And we have to change that thought process. Because, what we really require is startups in a whole slew of different sectors, particularly in manufacturing, right? And that is something that is sorely missing from our entire thought process. So we must therefore think about how to change the discourse and talk much more about startups in other areas.
And I don't want to make it seem like there are only challenges for the MSME space. So let's just take maybe a very quick step away. And I want to bring you in, Sumant. Talk to our audience tonight about what possibly some of the highlights have been of your entrepreneurial journey. You're in a very exciting space, so let me put you in the hot seat.
So of my personal journey, I can talk for hours and hours, so you'll have to stop me at some point. No, look, I think the good thing has been that we got into a sector at a very early stage, and a sector that, while the previous government was supporting, this government has chosen to take it to a whole different level altogether, which is in renewable energy. The government has set a target of 175,000 megawatts to be set up in the next 5 years, which means a total investment of almost $170, $180 billion. So that's a huge opportunity that suddenly opened up to us. Now, we were lucky that we were already operating in the sector. We already had a platform, so we're in a position to capitalize on this opportunity. But the other good thing for us was that while we are in a capital-intensive sector, we were able to raise capital. And one of the lessons I learned is actually two lessons, which are very important for everybody to know. I think one is always raise capital ahead of time. Never put yourself in a situation where you've got a business opportunity that you're trying to meet and you've committed yourself to it, but you don't have the capital to support that opportunity still, because that then puts you into a desperate position where you're trying all sorts of things to raise capital, and very often you end up getting into agreements with capital providers that are detrimental to you and that can cause you much risk in the future. So always raising capital ahead of time is, I think, one very important lesson that I learned. The second thing is, it is very important, because we're talking about third-party capital providers, that you run a very clean business. I think that is very, very important. My experience is that unfortunately in India, people tend to have a short-term mentality. And so therefore, the moment they raise some capital, they tend to go a little bit astray. But if you actually run your business very properly with great corporate governance, then people are actually going to be chasing you to put money into your company. Because unfortunately, there aren't that many good, clean companies that people can invest in. And as I said earlier, there is a lot of capital out there. So I think these have been my two most fundamental learnings, that you have to build your company for the long term.
From the multiple events that we do across the country where we meet with MSMEs, that is the top question that comes to us in terms of finance. We have a call-in show as well on the Leaders of Tomorrow, where everyone wants to know why is it so hard for us to raise funds? Sumant is saying it's not hard, but let me put you in the hot seat, Mr. Rajneesh Kumar. What advice do you have for our MSMEs?
It requires a lot of venture capital for startups in the initial years, because the mortality rate for the startups is very, very high. And traditional banking, if we look at that approach, then it doesn't work, which is more on the balance sheet or asset-based lending or the traditional methods of lending. But I can tell you that even at the State Bank of India, we have made a beginning. And we have set up a venture capital fund to support the fintechs. And even we have set up a program where a fintech, if it has come out with any, say for example, a good banking or financial services solution, so bank is willing to procure. But besides that, the traditional method of lending for MSMEs has always been what we call the balance sheet financing. And the problem with the balance sheet financing always has been the reliability itself of those financial statements. Another problem which was and is with the traditional method of lending is that it takes into account your financial position, MSME's financial position on a particular day. It is static. Whereas the business dynamics, it changes so often in the business that one day you may have an opportunity to build up your inventory. The other day it could be that there is a slowdown and you have more receivables. So even these traditional methods of lending must undergo a change. And the best way to fund the MSMEs is what we call the cash flow based financing. And now I believe, because your topic is now, and we are in a midst of like one of the biggest exercise in terms of demonetization. So as a banker, what we are expecting that the information about the cash flow which will now be coming to the banks, it will definitely enable us to have a close look and support the financing requirement. But yes, as I said, that it is debt capital, so there has to be sufficient equity capital. Where sufficient equity capital is not there, it has to be supported by venture capital. And depending upon at what stage the business is, that mix can and should always change.
I want to go back to what you were saying on demonetization. That's top of mind, of course, right now for everyone across industries. Do you expect there to be an impact for our MSMEs, and what advice do you have on how this could possibly play out?
So yes, we are seeing in the short term that, the audience here will bear this out, that yes, in the short term, everybody has been impacted in terms of the demand. That is what I keep on hearing from the ground and from the people. But in terms of the, what I would say, the cleanup part, as I had mentioned in my remark, that sometimes even on the balance sheets we could not rely, but on the actual cash flow. And if the cash flow is properly captured in the system, then it is very, very easy for the bank to finance. And for this particular period, I think maybe some sort of out-of-box thinking or some support to MSME will be required. And towards that, we have a very open mind, and we are interacting with our friends in the MSME industry, trying to understand how their business has been impacted and how bank can be of assistance.
Do either of you want to possibly add to how we are likely to see the impact of this playing out for your industry, maybe?
No, I think short term, as you correctly mentioned, there's fair amount of short term pain, which is possibly expected and has played out as expected. And the impact also is expected to be reasonably short term. In the long term, things should stabilize, and I mean, the kind of expectation that there's a significant amount of money would not come back, and that would finally reach government in some form. So that's going to really change quite a few things if it happens. I mean, it's a question which has not been answered as of now. But the immediate impact of short-term pain is a question of a couple of quarters, and I'm sure things will stabilize after that.
Okay. Mr. Varanasi, you also look at financing and funds and money. You also talk money, but very unlike SBI, you help MSMEs to list. I would like you to very quickly maybe talk to our MSMEs about how they possibly can list, or what is your advice in terms of, we've seen an uptick as far as the number of companies which are coming to market, at least in the first half of 2016. Is that something you expect will continue?
Definition of SME is different for us compared to the government definition. Any company which has post-IPO paid-up capital of less than 25 crores can get listed on the SME platform. And the entire process has been significantly simplified. Disclosures is one issue, but raising process itself has been simplified. Instead of filing with SEBI, the prospectus has to be filed with only the exchanges. The cost of raising is very large in case of a main board issuance, whereas an SME issuances, we have seen at 1/3 of the cost, SMEs have been able to raise capital from the market. And there is fair amount of hand-holding which is possible both from the exchange. In case of most main board companies, we really don't step out of they come to us. Whereas in SME cases, we're actually reaching out to entrepreneurs and making them aware of opportunities available to them. So as you correctly said, we have seen an uptick. About 50 companies got listed, and we have more than 100 entrepreneurs who are talking to us at various stages. And initial hiccups are always there in terms of, as MD State Bank has mentioned, the balance sheets usually don't look great. And short-termism is one of the reasons why balance sheets don't look very great for SMEs. So some amount of recasting of balance sheets has to happen. Some professional help is required. That professional help also is easily available now and at a fairly reasonable cost as such. So the ecosystem has been put in place, and our ability to reach out to entrepreneurs has increased substantially. And we really believe that this is the time for entrepreneurs who are seriously looking at raising capital or growing their businesses should look at SME platforms as a way to raise capital and then try and achieve their dreams.
Just a very quick follow-up question on that. I know it's very different for different industries, but is there kind of a thumb rule you can give our entrepreneurs and our MSMEs in terms of at what point of the business life cycle they should possibly look at listing?
Our requirement is the company should be in existence for 3 years, and at least 2 years positive cash flow should be there for raising capital from the market. And there are a number of companies. In fact, when we actually reached out and started talking to entrepreneurs, we realized that large number of companies have easily fulfilled this criteria and are looking for money. They're kind of there's a huge mental block in terms of they think listing is for large companies, not for them. That's one hassle, and the compliances is one more hassle. But compliances is most of the compliances can be met with a reasonable amount of housekeeping, and those services are available off the shelf nowadays. So to that extent, we believe the stage is set for entrepreneurs to really tap the market directly and raise capital.
While it has been a very engaging conversation, we're running out of time, so maybe I can quickly get closing comments from all of you gentlemen and Mr. Varanasi. If there's one thing that you want to leave our audience with tonight, what would it be?
Entrepreneurship has, the title itself says that this is the time for entrepreneurship. The environment, the ecosystem is in place, from finance to support services to entire HR and all kinds of services are available off the shelf. If you have a dream and if you have a passion to achieve the dream, this is the time to go forward and do it.
I want to tweak the question a little bit for you. There was a comment made earlier that most entrepreneurs now who are using technology in the startup space, unfortunately, are going towards e-commerce. In your mind, even as the field is being leveled for MSMEs to compete with their global peers, for MSMEs to compete with each other, what do you think it's going to take for more and more MSMEs to embrace technology and change?
I think the mindset first. Our experience sometimes with a lot of MSMEs has been that technology, they look at it as a cost. Because lots of customers we have found actually who don't invest in technology early enough, they remain at a little back compared to their competitors globally, and then they start technology adoption. And in the process, what happens, we've also seen people making mistakes of buying wrong technology, wrong pricing, and finally technology becoming not affordable what ideally it should be. So your technology should be part of your strategic pillar, and how you're really transforming yourself through right buying of technology use case. And third and last most important, and companies like us are now adopting this big time, is buying technology through contractual services. Because a lot of SMEs have problems of buying material on CapEx, especially the IT hardware and software and services. How do you move to more contractual, which will give you long-term sustenance of investment and continue yourself into technological curve of really going through that growth path?